Hi students, in this video I'm going to introduce some of the challenges that Great Britain faces in its relations with its colonies as we come towards the end of the 17th century and into the 18th century. And overall these are known as the colonial crisis. And so we're going to begin with a trading challenge. You remember that one of the reasons why the English colonies had grown more quickly than Spanish and French colonies was because of the lack of protectionism. It wasn't the case that the colonies could only trade with the mother country, England or France or Spain. The English colonies could trade with anyone. This meant that it was pretty advantageous to be a colonist. There were a lot of opportunities for someone living in English colonies, and the colonies grew more quickly. And Britain starts to change this approach towards the end of the 17th century and to the second half of the 17th century with the Navigation Acts in 1660 and 1663. And through these acts, the British try to control their colonies more closely. And they start to implement a more protectionist economic model, where the colonies can only trade certain goods with English merchants or British merchants. And this is because the British are fighting a war with the Dutch at the time. The Dutch are the other great merchant power in the world. They don't want the Dutch to profit from their own colonies. Nevertheless, for the colonists themselves, who aren't threatened by the Dutch in any way, who aren't particularly at war with the Dutch, this is a source of annoyance, and it's a source of a loss of income. And even when the war with the Dutch, between the Dutch and the English ends, the British don't immediately relax these restrictions. And so you see American unrest, even an American effort in Massachusetts to get rid of their governor in 1689. At the same time as you have the growth of Enlightenment political thought. Enlightenment political thought best exemplified by John Locke, the English political philosopher John Locke. And John Locke is the one who is beginning to introduce and develop these ideas of human beings having certain natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And he's introducing the idea that government does not grant these rights to people, but people have these rights naturally. And the government only receives its legitimacy through the consent of the people who are governed. So at the same time as the colonists are dealing with this more restrictive approach on the part of Great Britain, they're also embracing ideas that promote greater independence. So you can see how the two currents are starting to drift further apart. And this is papered over for a time. For the first half of the 18th century, this is papered over by a new English policy called the policy of salutary neglect. Basically, the British are going to keep these regulations on the books, but they are not going to enforce them. And so even though these regulations are there, the American colonies are allowed to trade with whoever they like to their own advantage. At the same time, other aspects of the English colonies also become more independent. And in this case, it's the colonial assemblies. Colonial assemblies, remember, if you're a citizen, if you're a property-owning male within these colonies, you have the right to vote for who becomes a part of this assembly. And these assemblies, because you have a greater percentage of the population that's property owning in North America than in Great Britain, these assemblies are becoming more and more influential. And they're exercising powers that even the English Parliament doesn't have. Power to set budgets, the power to determine taxation rates. And so at the same time as the English have sort of tried to get a greater grasp of governing their colonies and have backed off that a little bit, the colonies are more and more embracing ideas of self-government and of independence.